introducing. So really quick, Union Hall is a small nonprofit art space located in Denver, Colorado. We were founded in 2019. Predominantly, we support local artists and emerging curators as well, and we occasionally work with national artists. And before we get started, I just want to really quickly thank our sponsors. We are sponsored by the Colorado Community Foundation and Colorado Creative Industries, and they have made this exhibition and this program possible. And today I'm here with Kate Stone from New York and Saul Acevedo Gomez from Denver, Colorado. Let's see. So today we're here to discuss their work in the exhibition called Living Rooms. It is currently up at Union Hall Art Space in downtown Denver near Union Station, and it will be up until October 19th. We will share a link in the chat where you can see photos and video links once the show has ended on October 19th. So if you're not based in Denver and you want to see more imagery, feel free to check that link later. And just to give you a little bit of background about the exhibition, Living Rooms features the works of Kate Stone and Saul, who actually I was pleasantly surprised when I decided to pair their work in a show together to find out that they had already met before. That was serendipitous. In Living Rooms, we feature 4 of Kate's stop motion animation videos and several of Saul's really vivid, colorful color pencil drawings. And so when I curated Living Rooms, I was sort of thinking about how places can also be states of consciousness, holding their own sense of awareness and perception. I was thinking about how spaces or places are an extension of consciousness. And I really loved the dual perspectives of Kate and Saul and how they sort of complemented each other within that, and how they both had these completely different approaches to it. And as an artist and a creator myself, I've always been kind of drawn to haunting imagery or like works that leave you with like a feeling in your body or have like a visceral effect on you. And I feel like these works do that for me. I find like the imagery and the narratives within these works also activates the imagination. And I think in combination with the materials that they use, like color pencil and clay or stop motion, also kind of have this like sense of childlike wonder. And there's something about the creepy about the juxtaposition of childlike wonder and dark themes that kind of overlap in this show. So there is kind of a little bit of an unsettled or subtle horror in these works. I think that being in the show together in our space with the dark walls that I really like. And then I started to look deeper into their work, and I noticed right away this contrast between Kate, who's really focused on the domestic spaces, and Saul, who's predominantly drawing images of gallery spaces. So Kate, focusing on domestic spaces, kind of highlights how intimate, familiar environments can become sites of internal struggle, anxiety, paranoia. And this kind of suggests that the home, often viewed as a sanctuary, can also be a place where psychological distress is magnified, transforming it into like a unsettling, haunted space, which draws attention to the internal battles that manifest within the confines of the mind-body home. On the other hand, Saul has a totally different approach and uses gallery spaces to showcase his internal mythology and bring his private personal narrative into the public domain. This reveals a process of externalizing and sharing his internal world, turning the gallery into a sort of stage for his psyche. Unlike Kate, who keeps the tension within the domestic, Saul's approach transforms the gallery space into a place where the interior becomes externalized and publicly visible. So with that being said, both artists use the known and the familiar as kind of a base to explore the unknown or the mysterious. And without getting too much into the nitty-gritty, I just wanted to share kind of the overview of the exhibition and like the broad concepts behind it, and just how how I feel these two works kind of play off of each other, or the works play off of each other. And so, yeah, I guess without further ado, I would love to invite either Kate or Saul to, I guess, directly speak to your own work in a lot more detail, and would love maybe for you to introduce yourself and share a little more with us. Maybe Kate, do you want to start?
Sure. Yeah. So hi, I'm Kate Stone. I feel like you already gave a great introduction to my work. I feel like you explained it better than I ever could. But yeah, so I work primarily in sculpture and stop motion animation. The works in the show are all animated works. But whether it's the sculptures, animation, installation, whatever, all my work does have to do with architecture and domestic space and how our minds, the states of our minds and our bodies are reflected in those spaces. So while they are sort of domestic, intimate spaces, they're also very psychological, imaginary structures. And I'm specifically interested in kind of like the cognitive dissonance that happens when we are consuming sort of the horrors of the external world from the comfort or discomfort of our living room sofas. And I got really interested in that. I mean, I guess during COVID, like when we were all stuck at home, and I think even though my work was always sort of set in the domestic space and set in familiar spaces, being sort of stuck at home in that familiar space during a time of a lot of like upheaval really made me like view that space differently. And I wanted to explore that more in my work. So a lot of two of the animated works in the show were made sort of just during or right after COVID. But you can still see like the threads that go from the earlier animated works. The Night Side, which you see here, was made in 2019 actually, and is very much about a haunted space. It was referencing a lot of spiritualist or ideas or horror tropes, like crackling electricity and other invisible kind of forces that are taking over this domestic space. So, I mean, all the animations are definitely about these spaces sort of being taken over by, like Esther said, like paranoia or anxiety, and how that manifests in our personal spaces. If you want, I can go more in depth to the animation stills that you're showing here.
Can you tell us a little bit about your newest piece, Headwaters? I really love this one.
Thank you. Yeah, I'd be happy to. That's the most recent one, so it's like the easiest for me to talk about. But so I made that actually at a residency in Finland. I was invited to go collaborate with local philosophers, and they were specifically researching ideas about post-truth and like this post-truth world that we live in now. So I wanted to make an animation that was set in kind of like the headspace or home of a conspiracy theorist. So it's this sort of pristine, very like white, clean domestic space that's being overtaken by this black clay. And the black clay to me was representative of this post-truth paranoia. So as this sort of absent main character is getting deeper and deeper into this paranoia, the architectural space is slowly taken over. Yeah, and I guess I love conspiracy theories that for the same reason I love like haunted house stories. You know, even if it's fiction, I feel like it's a really great mirror to society, and it reflects like real issues, even if the stories are kind of absurd. And there are all these conspiracy theories about hollow earths that I think are really fascinating. My favorite is this one called the concave hollow earth theory, which is that the earth is hollow and we're actually living on the interior surface of it, and the sun is at the center of the earth. So I don't know. I just think that like
Wow.
the fiction of conspiracy theories or ghost stories or whatever is so creative and poetic and reflective of like real serious issues in society and politics.
Cool. Um, these are some of the process shots that you shared with us that I wanted to show because I'm always really curious about what the stop motion process looks like and how intensive it can be, and just like how many different skills are required within this medium. And so one of the questions I wanted to ask is, what challenges or joys do you find in working with all of these different materials and within the sets in this process?
Yeah, I mean, it changes a lot sort of from conception to completion in terms of what I'm working with. You know, there's like the physical part of the process of building the set and animating it, and then there's the more digital side, which is like editing. And stop motion can be really tedious and time consuming. So I feel like getting to mix it up and use different skills and different kind of technology keeps it really fresh and interesting for me. And I try, you know, prior to Headwaters, I had never worked with clay before. So getting to introduce that into the work was really exciting. And it gave me like a new thing to sort of play with and experiment with. And I very rarely have a plan in advance of making an animation. I have a very loose idea. Um, like for example, with Headwaters, I had the idea of, you know, the space of the conspiracy theorists, and I knew I wanted to work with this clay, and that's kind of it. And then I just built the first set and just started playing around. And I like working intuitively in that way without a storyboard or a plan, because then it really lets the piece kind of like get a life of its own. And it's sort of more fun and exciting for me to not know where it's going to go and just like let it evolve naturally.
That's amazing. I feel like it's hard to work intuitively in such in that kind of discipline. Personally, I feel like I would make so many mistakes
Oh, I
and
do.
then backtrack.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe that's half the fun is like learning as you go.
Yeah. Well, and then there's like happy accidents or little discoveries you make along the way, which I feel like that's like what I do it for. That's the most exciting part is discovering something that you didn't plan.
Was there anything that kind of happened for you in Headwaters? Like any like small discoveries or serendipities in the process?
Um, Trying to think of a good example. Like, I mean, building that staircase was not planned. That just kind of happened. I mean, and it actually started with, if you go back to the previous slide, or maybe it was the next slide, sorry, the behind the scenes. So I did on the right, that's where there's this one scene that's kind of a close up of this clay, and this hole opens up and it reveals the staircase going down. And then when I built the next set, I was like, oh, well, the next set should be where that staircase leads to. So then I built, you know, the stairs that would go up. And so it's like one shot really like leads to the next and determines sort of it's almost like a choose your own ending book. Like you pick one path and then it leads you to the next thing, to the next thing, to the next thing. So it's kind of like almost a game for myself, like a puzzle to figure out.
That makes sense. How long did this one take to make?
3 months.
That's it?
Yeah. Well,
That's
I was in
fast.
Finland and I didn't know anybody really, so I was working. I was very productive. Yeah.
Wow. Um, okay, well, I think we'll come back to more of your work and let's get an intro from Saul and I'll go back to Saul's work. Saul, can you share a little bit about your practice and what inspired you to create the works that are in the Union Hall show now?
Sure. Yeah. So my name is Saul Acevedo Gomez, and my primarily it's conducted by drawings. But lately, I've been trying to incorporate new materials like thread and so the canvas as well. And I've been kind of pushing as well the idea of what a drawing is. I think like my intention here is not just to create drawings for the sake of creating drawings, but also like push the limits of what a drawing can be. And in my work currently right now is going through the idea of transforming it, changing it, and mainly by transforming myself. So just looking back at what I was doing before and what I'm doing now, I think the works that I used to do quite early, they were a little bit more stiff, and there was not a lot of spontaneity. They were fun to me. They were surprising to do, but at the same time, they didn't feel kind of human. And that realization kind of happened after having my show with Civil Gallery in New York. I realized that most people were connecting to the work that was a little bit more raw, more fun, that it was imperfect. And so to me, it just made sense that like why was I making something that it's perfect when nobody's perfect? And because the works were a little bit more human, more vulnerable, I think that's what made people feel more connected to it, to those kind of works. And I think like I was someone who was I was creating for a while in order for me to obtain some kind of validation and acceptance. And I realized that I wasn't making the truest work I should be making. And then I started to think about my subconsciousness, my daydreams, my uncivilized things that are like more of me as a kid, and that I was kind of like killing and quieting because many people wouldn't accept it. And I think that's why like this body of work just feels very natural and very authentic to me because um, like in some way it was such an easy way for me to even talk about the work. Like when I remember someone asking me during the opening, it's like, how do you feel about the work? Do you get nervous? And I'm like, this is the first time that I never feel nervous because the work was very honest and it was very personal and very magical for me. And I think this is what I was trying to, I guess, push the viewer to see is like this fan of making things that you're afraid of doing. And it's kind of like I wanted people to have like that validation to transform themselves and to follow kind of like their dreams and rely on their imagination because I was putting those things down because I didn't want to trust them. I was forgetting about them. And so this work was very healing in the way that I was looking at who I was and as a kid and now who I am becoming. And so I had to do different things in my life, such as meditating, visualization, and even working out. That really helped me creating a routine where I'm kind of like confronting myself, allowed me to come up with these drawings that I know I wouldn't be making if I wasn't challenging myself, and also if I wasn't doing new things. So this works kind of like representative of who I was becoming probably since November of last year. So it's been a year since I felt that the war has taken a very strong transformation. And all of these works happen to be part of the series called Transformation, the Moon, the Tree, and the Snake. And those are three things that Anne Saldua in her book, like in the Dark, kind of talks about a little bit. For example, in this one, she talks about the rib cage as being something that holds your body. So in each rib, there's something that I value, and so that you see innovation, uncivilized, excellence, imperfection. So those were the things that I was kind of like accepting, practicing, and all of that created my spirituality. And spirituality is something that a lot of people, we all have it, but we don't necessarily cultivate because it's something that it's not tangible. It's something visible that happens through your actions and by doing and being. And just like for example, the snake is something that is continuously transforming. And for me, the snake became such an easy thing to incorporate into the work because it's kind of like flexible, but it's also very linear, and that allowed me to creatively incorporated into different ideas, such as the snake becoming a tree, or the spine becoming a snake, or becoming like a waterfall, or things like that. So it allowed me to incorporate it in a different ways. But it also, to me, it represents the uncivilized. And Sadua gives a different perspective of Adam and Eve, where Eve, by grabbing the fruit, she is seen as someone who's not following the rules. She's maybe challenging the norms. So Ansadua says that she was not disobeying, but instead she was trying to reach knowledge. And so she becomes the first human being to acquire this opportunity to see the evil and the good. So also, for example, or even like the subconsciousness and consciousness. So you begin to see this idea of the in-between of things by looking at the contrast of things, of good and bad, or civilized and uncivilized. And I think that was something that it was beautiful for me, because it allowed me to see a different story of who I can be and what I can create by by trusting the uncivilized within me. And for example, this one, through visualization, I was kind of like thinking about the snake so much. And I remember I was taking a shower and setting the water to be super cold, and this image of the snake came into my head. But then I wanted to add different ideas with, or like, at least, I guess, make the invisible become real by incorporating new materials that will make the work be real, be part of of what is real, make it more tangible, something that you can touch. Because in metaphysics, there's this idea of the invisible and then the visible. The invisible is always going to exist. So, for example, ideas or imagination, God, things that we cannot see, that are invisible, they're always going to exist in some kind of way, even if we were to live, we're to die. But things that are tangible, like nature, or materials that we create, even art itself, it's something that it's eventually going to change, or that it's going to disappear. And so it's kind of like, I guess, like, it's a push towards making my daydreams, or my dreams, or my visualizations, make them real and tangible.
There's a lot being referenced here in this piece, especially if you look on the left. In every single work that you make, down at the bottom, there's kind of, here, let me zoom in on one of them, like here down at the bottom, this sort of like notes and color testing. And I just wonder, like, what inspired you to leave this in the work and share your process?
Yeah, so I think, like, what inspired me was breaking away from the limitations of printmaking. Early in my undergrad, I was introduced to lithography, and I noticed that I was ending with the same image over and over again, and the limitations of the aesthetics of remaking just happened to be very limiting. So it was about breaking away from the frame and removing the edition number, the title, and the signature, and incorporating new text that will kind of like making conversation with the viewer. Because sometimes I feel like artworks can become very quiet, in the way that the artwork needs the viewer to be present in order for it to exist. So I wanted to challenge that idea of the theatrical space. So the theatrical space is the gallery, and then the actor is the viewer. And because the viewer is in there, it's allowing the work to exist. So I wanted the work to be independent, and I think incorporating printmaking and also sketching so much, because I was sketching so much, making thumbnails and putting notes in my sketchbooks, I realized that I could use those ideas to kind of like inform and create a conversation between the image, the text, and the viewer. So it was a way to create communication where you're not just looking at the artwork and giving meaning to it, but also the work itself is inviting you, and it's also challenging you with imagery and text.
Yeah, I feel like both of your works do that in their own way, for sure. And then really quick too, there's another thing I wanted to address. So there's this kind of meta reference going on where you have a work within a work, and then you create it and you put it above the piece. Yeah, and I was just wondering if it serves as like playing with layers of reality, uh, or if it's a reference to the work itself, or what exactly like is your thought process behind bringing that piece out?
Mm-hmm. So I think it's like there is this of like self-referential, right? Because I'm looking at I'm kind of questioning myself and trying to see myself from different perspectives by creating like different meanings. But I also think that there's this idea of the unreasonable that I read from a book called Unreasonable Hospitality. And it's kind of, it gave me like the freedom to explore new dimensions. And so by grabbing something from the drawing, which is invisible in a way, making it real, then I'm kind of reading like this idea of like, or this in between of what's real and what is not real. And and by putting it on top of the drawing, it almost became like this painting. It's protecting the drawing, or it becomes like the spirit of the drawing. But it was a way to activate the architecture of the gallery. And so in some way, to me, these paintings also like kind of, I wanted to push the bird to, like, the way I see them is as if these paintings are also activating the wall, and so like it makes the wall become alive, just like in the drawing itself, right? Like they're not they're not very simple. Like the it's a little more allegorical, I guess, or there's more playfulness in the walls. So they're not plain, right? There's a lot of wood grain that it's kind of creating this sensation of emotions and energy. So it was a way to activate and go beyond of what it's reasonable, like when it comes to presenting a work. So it's challenging those ideas and also giving permission to myself and others to explore that crazy idea of the way an artwork should be presented and even experienced.
Nice. Well, I think it's really effective. Um, I had a question for Kate. I'm gonna go back to one of Kate's images. Um, so I'm probably gonna like bounce back and forth a little bit between you two, but Kate, what inspired you to like start working with subject matter like, ethereal things like ghosts or conspiracy theories, or even just like paranoia and anxiety in the first place?
When it comes to ghosts and the supernatural, I always attribute it to the house that I grew up in. Um, it was like this 200-year-old farmhouse, sort of at the end of the dead end street that like none of the kids wanted to trick or treat at because they thought it was haunted. And my friends didn't want to sleep over because they thought it was haunted. And I was always really disappointed that it wasn't. And then I like didn't have any ghost stories. Um, but it was like a very unique house, and it had, attics that you couldn't access, or like doors that were boarded up. It was like full of mystery. And I remember as a kid, like wandering around my own house, I could like discover sort of strange things. And so I think a lot of my work is kind of creating that kind of mystery or the supernatural that didn't exist in my house as a kid, but that I always kind of like dreamt of.
Mm.
And then I guess I always sort of thought of the supernatural as less of something about fear and more of something about like wonder and amazement. But then, over the last, I don't know, how long has it been? Like 7 years or whatever. I feel like there have been a lot of reckonings in this country in particular, and like things have gotten really scary. And I feel like I just started thinking about things differently, and like using the supernatural or the invisible as sort of a stand-in for the anxiety that we experience. Because also, I mean, even historically speaking, belief in the supernatural always kind of has an uptick when there's political or social upheaval. Like spiritualism was a response to the Civil War. I remember reading that in around the 2016 election, there was an increase in requests for Catholic exorcisms. So I feel like it's sort of like the perfect metaphor, like ghosts or the unexplainable are this perfect metaphor for sort of like inner turmoil in response to external turmoil, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes total sense. Yeah. Um, you're also right now, you're also a mother to be.
Yes.
And so I guess it's with someone, because your creative process is very based in like mind body connection and that sort of like horror that can exist within that. How are you kind of processing these themes like in your personal life with being about to be a mother and being pregnant?
Yeah, I mean, pregnancy is like the most sci-fi thing, but it's also so banal. Like it's so normal. Everybody does like
Yeah.
women are pregnant every day and have babies every day, and it's so normal, and we really take that for granted, but it's also totally insane. Um, and I think that that's really interesting. And that kind of contradiction is something I've always been interested in my work, like taking the banal and then like twisting it into something other. So I feel like it fits right in. And I don't know. I'm curious. I feel like because I'm so in it right now, it hasn't had a direct effect on my work quite yet, but I'm sure that it will. And I'm definitely excited to see what kind of effect it has. Certainly, one thing I'm having a hard time letting go of is there's a name for when you can first feel a baby move like inside you, and it's called the quickening, which
Oh.
sounds just like the name of a horror movie to me. So I really want to make a piece called The Quickening that's inspired by that.
Oh my God. I look so forward to seeing that
Thank
um,
you.
in the future. Um, okay. Okay, I'm gonna go back. Let's go back to Saul really quick. Sorry, I'm jumping around. Um, so Saul, I personally really love this particular piece because it really has there's like a couple multiple takes that I see going on here. The title, I was losing the uncivilized within me, which is like this disconnection, I feel like, from your own nature. And I feel like it also kind of mirrors humanity's disconnection with nature and with all of the trees and branches scattered around the ground. And I was wondering if you could speak to this piece a little bit, particularly like some of
Mhm.
the imagery that we've got zoomed in on.
Yeah, so I think like so this piece is I think it's the second one from the series that I did. And it was like the way the title is, right? I was losing the civilized within me. So it's a realization. So when you look at the figure, it has its pupil is like really big, right? So it's like awakening and realizing that it's burning that snake that is within, like perhaps is the Nawal or your animal spirit that you're killing because you don't wanna allow it to be seen or you don't wanna experience it. And that's why like there's the street that is being destroyed because we're not necessarily seeing nature beyond something that is like economical, I guess, or like I think the problem here with nature in general as a society and like comparing it to like indigenous people, the indigenous people had like a very more natural and connected and a spiritual connection with nature. And us humans who are more civilized, I think like we have made it more objective, and so like when you go outside, you just see a tree or a snake or an animal, but you don't necessarily connect with it on a different level that can become subjective. And so I think like that's my push as well by incorporating nature in it is to like allow people to see nature beyond its of like the economical or like the or what is used for us. And so like when you look at the walls, right, there's this spiritual figures that are dying because you're kind of killing your own spirit, and they're kind of like burning these paintings. And it's like you're killing yourself before death. And there was this meditation from the book of awakening, is that like sometimes we're killing these little things that we shouldn't be killing, but there's also these things that we gotta be killing in order for us to transform. And it was really about that. It was about like why am I destroying my nature? Like why am I not listening to it, my spirit animal, or like my childhood that is within me? So I think it was about that. And like this figure in particular, it's kind of like stuck. It's kind of like numb, because it's not vain. It's instead it's just killing. It's not doing anything, but it doesn't realize that it's also destroying its nature onto that point. And yeah, I think that really what the work is about.
Thank you. Thanks for sharing. Yeah, I feel like there's there are certain traits and characteristics that we are told to repress by our culture and by society. And I feel like this also kind of represents that on an internal level and an external level, which is really,
Hmm.
really neat. You have
Yeah,
a
yeah.
really,
And sorry, say that again.
oh no, go ahead.
Yeah, and like I think that the book, like In the Dark, kind of goes through that idea of being dismembered by society. She is a Chicana, a lesbian, a person of color, and feminist, and society often kind of challenged her. She also had diabetes, so her body was in constant change and transformation. So she kind of like had to find a new meaning so that she can put back all these parts of her body together, and become something that she wants to be. So you're constantly being challenged by society, but even by yourself. And I think that's good, because then it means that you're seeking your own truth. And there is a book called The 40 Rules of Love that talks about how doubting is seeking your truth, because often society gives us these ideas that we're not choosing, that maybe they're not true to ourselves. And even like choosing your own values, at some point they're gonna change if you question them, because they're not adding any more chance to you, or any more authenticity to you. So it's this constant doubting, not necessarily doubting your abilities, but doubting your limitations and your ideologies, so that you can find what is really true to you.
That book, is it called The Light, A Light in the Dark? Is that what inspired a lot of this work?
Yes, yeah, yeah. Yeah, it's called like In the Dark by Gloria y Ansaldúa.
Okay. You keep telling me about it and I think I want to read it.
Yeah, I think it's such a great book, because I think she just takes everything from a spiritual approach, or like practices, and those are things that you kind of had to do by yourself. And there are, I think, like I find that the spiritual is a way to heal you, but also to heal other people. And she also talks about the collective imagination, how especially now in today's world, there's really no trust with one another. There's really no love. There's no connectivity, or collective imagination is very damaged by who did this, who did that, and there's no responsibility and no act of trying to make things better for anyone. And I think that's also part of the reason why I think like I created, is to have these different perspectives that are imaginary and magical, so that I can find a way to connect people back to one another again.
I feel like it's really interesting the dynamic between your both of your approaches because you just said collective imagination and when I think of Kate's work, I do think of like this like collective imagination or collective phenomenon that people are experiencing. And then with your work, Saul, it's like this internal collective, like it's like this internal collective mythology that's being explored. So I just like how there's all of these different layers of inner, outer, domestic, public, private, like kind of overlapping each other within this exhibition. And it's just really neat to hear you both talk about it and like kind of see that shining through. Um, yeah, I think I'll just ask like maybe one more question and then we'll keep chatting a little bit and see if there's any questions in the chat for either of you. So we'll kind of open it up to the audience or anyone that's watching live on YouTube right now. Saul, your mark making is really interesting. You have this balance that is like really well done, balancing, I think, technique and this kind of loose quality. And I'm just wondering like, what was I going to ask? How do you find that balance, or how did you find that balance?
So I think like that balance, it's like I mentioned before, a lot of the work, like my previous work, early work, it was very uh, perfectionist. So there was a lot of straight lines that were very stiff, and there was no errors, there was no rawness in each of the mark makings. And now with this work, I decided to not do any straight lines. There's at least, you can sense that there's straight lines, but they're not necessarily perfect. So I think like I guess there's this intention of having a duality between perfect and imperfect, and non-human and human, and real and imaginary, also uncivilized and civilized. So there's this truth of being human in each of the marks that I'm making now. And it just felt more like, for me, it felt more authentic to approach the work in this way without making things very stiff, because it allowed me to make mistakes and find and surprise myself as well. I think like I know when a work is done, when I have like this pleasure, because I challenge myself, because I tried something new, a new material, a new color, a new mark making. And I think like the aesthetics of the drawing kind of act like this idea of the technical process. And I see the aesthetics as a map. And I think this map allows me to bring in new materials and new approaches into the work. And because the aesthetics, I see them as limitations, there's also this idea of like continue to break this pattern of like, at the beginning it was breaking the limitations of remaking. Now it's like breaking the limitations of perfectionism. And just going back to what you were saying about the internal and the external, for me personally, perfectionism is external. And when you are working into perfection, you're thinking so much about what people are going to think, and that limits you so much. And so I started to think about the internal, which I see it as excellence. Excellence is something that it's not that there's no specific definition. There's no seeking, like a more like a perfect thing. It's very internal, and it allows it to be more free and more unique. And your excellence, it's your standards as well. So I think like for me, these standards happen to be imperfect and raw and emotional and very vulnerable. I think like this work, because it's very personal, it allow it to be very, very vulnerable. And if I want to be vulnerable, I also had to make things to be very, very raw and not very stiff. So I think that was my approach with this work, to make it feel natural and unique and very personal.
I think it's really interesting that you went from having like um, like a lot of technique and a lot of skill and going from this place of perfectionism to like scaling it down to a more loose, playful, raw side of things. I feel like that's actually really hard to do. Like, it's like being a classically trained violinist and then trying to, I mean, maybe it's easy. I don't know. Maybe once you have, all the scales, you have complete freedom to go wherever you want to go, however you want to get there. But I just feel like a
Right.
lot of people get really stuck in these rigid ways, or these like classical ways of drawing or painting. And so I just think that's really interesting that you felt like you pulled yourself out of that like perfectionistic place to create like a more raw human feeling, emotional work.
Mhm.
Um, and then you
Yeah,
talked, oh, sorry, go ahead.
s- yeah. So I think like for me, it's just giving yourself to be bad at things. So, because there's something this pressure of like making things perfect,
Mhm.
and perfectionism just is like there's no. I think what happens with perfectionism is that like we're seeking the ideal, and you get to the point where you keep seeking the ideal and you begin to remove everything, and I find that you end up with like minimalist art, right? Like to the simplest of what art can be. And so you end up with just color and form and composition that is, it's just all the way to the ideal, and there's no information anymore. And then the work becomes very objective. And so by just, looking to, I guess, challenge yourself and allowing yourself to also be bad at things, then you find the mistakes to be very unique and very part of yourself, and you don't have to question them because it's something that it's within your nature.
Yeah. So you talked about knowing when a work is done. So I wanted to ask Kate, within that process, because you also work intuitively, like how do you know when an animation is done?
I feel like it's done when I lose interest in it. I don't know. Or it's done when I feel like I've exhausted the set. Like I build the set and I work within some certain parameters. And when I feel like I've sort of exhausted everything within that, then I guess it's feels finished.
Yeah, because you're consistently kind of moving things around. And I imagine, especially with like the clay over the top of the floor, like this can like discolor things. And like,
Yeah.
I'm sure that the little pieces get worn out over time.
Yeah. Well, I mean, but it's hard to know when to quit because like for example with this
Mhm.
animation, I it had to be done at the end of this residency that I was doing. But if the residency had been a month longer, I could have made, another 2 minutes of animation that could have been on top of that. So sometimes it's really helpful to just have a deadline that you have to meet. Because otherwise you could just work on it forever. But yeah, there are certain things also with animation, like you said, with discoloration and wear and tear that you sort of only have one shot at it um, and then you just have to move on, I guess.
I guess that also probably maybe you also grapple with this idea of perfectionism too and having to let go. I mean, like, is that also part
Yeah.
of it?
I mean, everything Saul said like really spoke to me with that because I think I am a perfectionist and I look back at the work I made when I was younger that was like looser and a little messier and I really admire that now and I feel like I'm always kind of striving to loosen up and it's very hard to do. And I have to say one of my favorite things about your work, Saul, is the stuff, the notes at the bottom and the tests. And I remember the first time I saw your work in person, I was so interested in that because it feels sort of like an inventory or like a almost like a toolbar of like the things you use to make the image. And it's like a little peek into the behind the scenes and your process that feels so intimate and personal. And I admire that because I feel like I don't often let people sort of see the inner workings of my own brain. You know what I mean? And
Hmm.
I don't know. I love that part of your work. I think it's so like brave to keep that there, but it adds so much to the work and really like offers the viewers an entry into it.
Well, I appreciate that. I mean, I think you also do it as well, right? The work itself is, even though people don't see the process of it, I think the emotion of it is sharing like these experiences that you're going through, and like you said, it took you 3 months, right? But those 3 months happen to come to to conceive this imagery, and this transformation allows it to be very vulnerable and very raw as well. So I think perhaps we do it, but just differently. And I think
Yeah.
like even like I remember seeing your sculpture in spring break, and we also talked about this idea of the unknown a little bit, like there's things that we will never get to know, and or the things that we will never get to know because they're extinct, or the things that we will never get to know because we never tried them out. And I think that's something beautiful about the work, is like this idea of the unknown. And I think like my work doesn't necessarily have that unknown because there's words, so there's a lot of information, and it kind of shares my experience as an artist, right? Like this all these texts and mark makings at the bottom kind of come from things that I'm reading, things that I'm watching, things that I'm learning. So I guess perhaps there is an unknown as well, but it's kind of showing people, or at least the viewer, that there's more than just a beauty and just like the final work. And in your work does show that because of the emotion of it, and all the time that it takes. I mean, only you really know how much it takes,
Yeah.
but 5 minutes, it can't say so much, right? Sometimes, but you do have it in there, I think.
Well, I think your work is unknown too. I mean, I think artwork should be sort of unknown. I think if it answers all the questions, then it really like shuts it down.
Yeah.
And you have the text and things, but I think they just offer clues. It's just like a little, it sort of forces the viewer to act almost like a detective, to be like, oh, well, what does this mean? And how does this tie into the completed image above it? And I don't know. I think it's yeah.
That is a good perspective. Like having, I think it really does make sense, because sometimes as artists we wanna explain ourselves so like people can understand what the work is. But what you just said, keeping it unknown allows it to, I guess, to be continuous, to be, it allows you to maintain yourself curious and to continue to seek new ways of doing and being. And I think you're right when it comes to the unknown.
So I'm going to chime in here with a question from the chat. So this is a question for Saul from Hannah, and she says, "Your many distinct recurring figures, animals, etc. How do you decide what form these particular subjects should take, and do they serve as stand-ins for any particular ideas for you?"
So in my previous work, the figures were like a little bit more stiff. They were not moving. They were just observing everything, and that was who I was. I was, it's like people watching in a way. You're experiencing things through other people. And now these figures are having legs and hands, and they're kind of like moving a little bit more, experiencing the space. And there's two different types of figures. The ones that have like the almond eye, those are like animals or spirits, and the ones that have like a circular eye, those are us. And the intention of these figures happened to be like I was trying to find a way to make the work feel neutral by eliminating gender and ethnicity. And so these figures happen to be a way to allow other people to feel connected to it without looking like them. And I don't know if they still, they serve a stand-in for something in particular, but as of now, I think like they are in freedom. They're like moving instead of just having they're actually doing in vain and then having something like epiphanies or experiencing something. So I think like sometimes, when it comes to art, we're making, and as we're making it, we stop ourselves to analyze the work. And I happen to do that so much. But this work in particular, it was very subconscious. I decided to not plan anything, not make a sketch for it, and I just let go and I went for it. And yeah, it's just it's such a crazy thing to come with a drawing that you didn't plan and be one of the best works that you can do, right? So I think like having different practices of approaching and making artwork can be very helpful and like allows you to break away. And like even when like taking a break from making art, like honestly, I haven't been making art for almost 2 months. It's just like a lot of things have changed in my life that the moment I began to make something, like I have so many ideas and there's so much freedom, and I think like because the figures are moving more, it's also because I was also living life more. Because back then I was just making art all day, every day. I was almost like finishing one drawing in a day, and then I realized that I was just making art about art. There was no human experience in it. And lately, because I've been transforming, myself, creating routines, having a more stable job, that has allowed me to be part of society, but also live life. Since my sister moved here to Denver, I see her like twice a week, and I get to spend time with her. And so I'm giving myself the opportunity to enjoy life. I don't think that it's healthy for you as an artist to choose be making art all the time. You also have to be, I guess, human. You have to experience life, and you also have to be part of society. So I guess like maybe that hopefully that answers that question. But I think, it's like there's the more human figures and then the more spiritual figures, and they kind of like present themselves here a little bit more in the new work.
Thanks. Yeah, I think that definitely answered the question in terms of the figures. There's also these figures that sort of like this one in particular that sort of blend into the wall.
Mhm.
How do you
So
um
I just allow my subconsciousness to allow it to make something out of it. Um, it's like, surprising myself and allowing my subconsciousness to be listened and to be seen, right? Because if I'm making something from the subconsciousness, then I'm also allowing it to be seen, to be perceived by myself and understand what it's trying to tell me. And so I think like this is what they were I'm thinking about the spirits, right? Like Ansaldúa gives a different perspective to daydreams, and I really love this because it allowed me to see daydream as something that can be healing. Because I used to daydream so much about scenarios of like controlling everything and receiving acceptance, or like incorporating people into these daydreams that I have complete control over it. And those were limiting because I wasn't being myself. And now every time I have a daydream, I I look into it as a tool of healing. And so she suggests to look at daydreams as messages from your ancestors or from spirits that are trying to tell you something. And when I started to look at daydreams as something like that, then I realized, well, there's my subconsciousness is kind of like trying to tell me something through my daydreams. But how can I change my daydreams into something that can enhance me to have a more creative life? Like this one, this is the act of using my daydreams to create something more fulfilling and beautiful. And how I conceived this work, it was I went with my dog to the park, and I was laying down with my dog, and I was looking at the grass and thinking that it was like a huge blanket on top of this land that it was covering like the trees as well. And so I went back home, and I often daydream, like like I daydream for the most part, for the most here in my bedroom, which is my studio. So this is the representation of my studio, where I have like one of the furniture has an eye, so it's kind of like the furniture is alive as well, and it's kind of like waiting for me to use it. And there's this visualization of creating a having a drawing and before making it, or and there, on the other side you have like these different areas of daydreams of like my nepantla, which I'm sorry, my nahual, which is your spirit animal, and I have always associated myself to the animal of the lion, because I think like it's a figure of, for me at least, is like something that gives me the courage to go and do the things that I might be afraid of. But there's this square that is like the gallery, and there's also another one of that is part of like the previous work of like the rib cage. So there's this connection of daydreams, and this drawing was also inspired by the one of the paintings of Leonora Carrington. It's called Less Distractions, the Dagobert. And when I saw this painting, which is like this composition of different worlds together, that kind of like different distractions, and daydream can also be distractions. So how it's like make sure that your daydreams are not distracting you from doing something, but instead they're there to heal you and allow you to think creatively.
I love that. I know that, you kind of told me the origin story of drawing gallery spaces because you were standing in a gallery all day looking at the gallery walls.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah, yeah,
and I
yeah,
imagine
yeah.
there's very little to do but daydream.
Absolutely, but I think like working at the Denver Museum, it allowed me to daydream of more spaces and how I can, make art be experienced differently. Because it's like, to me, I see art as a kind of like a dish. You have different materials, different different foods, their seasoning, and like there's an artist, there's a chef. It's I can remember his name. I think it's Alex or Alan something. And he comes. It's a he has an episode on the a Netflix show called The Chef's Table, and he talks about how in every dish that we have, there's also death. It's not just beauty in it. There's also dead plants and dead animals. So he wants the consumer to see the the I guess the good and the bad in eating. And also there's this phrase where he says that for something to be alive, something else has to die. So there's this realization that in everything that we do, there's where it's part of the cycle of life.
Um, Speaking of, I guess, daydreams, Kate, do you have a relationship with them that informs your practice in any way?
For sure. Although I feel, yeah, I mean, I think like often if I can't sleep at night, I'm rather than counting sheep or something, I'm like thinking about whatever art project I'm working on at the time. And I think it's like the perfect time to daydream about that because you're sort of like in this in-between stage of like awake and asleep and you're relaxed. And I feel like often, I don't know, for me anyway, because there's no distractions, it's like that's when I like the most random ideas will pop into my head that I feel like wouldn't happen if I was trying to think of something. And I think there's so much value in daydreaming or just letting your mind wander. And I don't know, I feel like I've spoken with friends recently about like cell phone usage and how hard it is to just be bored and like not
Mhm.
look at your phone and just let your mind wander. And I think that's, something society has like really lost.
Yeah, you did a whole piece kind of linked to that, right? With Doom Scroll.
Yeah, yeah.
Loved seeing that piece. I mean, I couldn't see it in person, but I definitely stalked it online.
Thank you. Yeah, doom scrolling. It's a problem.
Yeah. Okay, well, I don't know if we have any more questions. I would love to get some more audience questions if anyone has any out there. In the meantime, I'm gonna ask you all, do you have any upcoming exhibitions or projects that our audience can look forward to in the future that you want to share?
I'm just my last deadline is having this baby, so
That's a big one. That's
yeah.
a pretty big project.
Yeah. So for now, just trying to finish some work in the studio, but no exhibitions planned at the moment.
Good. It's good to take a break. And when
For
you're
me, it's the same. For me, it's the
biggest
same.
sci-fi thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, for me, it's the same. I'm not having a kid, but I'm definitely not having any plans when it comes to an exhibition. But I am working towards uh, finally going towards grad school. So, applications are coming soon. So I'm kind of like working on that, making work specifically for that. But that's really it, and just trying to enjoy myself a little bit more.
Those are great things to do. I feel like as artists, we're constantly pressured to produce. And so it's definitely good to take a step back and focus on other areas. Okay, well, I guess I could uh, plug that the show is going to be up until October 19th for anyone who wants to check it out and has not checked it out. It's such an honor to have this work in the gallery together and such an honor to be showing Kate's work from New York. So definitely stop by. We're open till 6 p.m. on the 19th. That's the last day that you can see it. And then on Halloween, we're actually having an art opening called Warning Me Ama by local artist Diego Arroyo Flores, he's filling the gallery with all new work pertaining to the mother in Aztec culture, his own culture, and within his family as well. So definitely come visit us if you're out on Halloween. Come say hi, wear a costume. And thank you, Saul and Kate, for chatting with me. That was really nice to get a little more in depth about your process, your practice, and just get to know you both a little more.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, of
Yes.
course. I guess that's it for the night, everyone. I'm gonna go ahead and sign off. Just let us know if there's anything that we need to do in particular other than leave. All right. Well, everyone have a good night. And thank you for joining. And thank you, Kate and Saul, once again.
Thank you.
Thank you, Esther.
Bye.